Stephen, thank you. That's an excellent talk number 5. We're about to go into the 6th and final one. One thing that came out of that very clearly for me was, I suppose one might call it the divine corrective, which is that it is through Jesus that we understand Abba, the Father, and his desire to incorporate humanity in his community and in the riches of his existence, that very much unifying collective. So the point you made was that Israel, all the way through the Jewish scriptures, didn't really get that. They had something which was very opposite. Although it's something that we think they got spot on, but actually they didn't get spot on. They saw God as the sky god and above all the other lesser gods, and they simply missed out on the fact that he wanted to invite them into community. So that's one very good thing. But now you're going to go into the part 6. Take it away.
Okay, well, I just want to get some practical examples, the best I can, of something that might have been sin in their world that's not in ours. Okay, so what does sin look like in an HonorShame society? Let's talk about the whole idea, and this is biblical now. So when people say we want a biblical worldview, let's talk about the issue of arranged marriages. You know that children were hooked up with each other at 8 and 9 and 10 years old because your individual feelings simply didn't come into the picture. It was all about the union of the tribe or the clan, and by uniting tribes or clans, it either brought peace to clans that were in of violence with each other, or it brought assets, and then you get into issues of dowry, and together we are greater. And because together our honor status has now gone up. Shoot, Bridget, that practice didn't go away until to the 19th century, even in our own culture. You know, women were literally trading commodities for status. And that just doesn't exist in the idea that the feelings of the individual do not play in any way into a marriage is simply foreign to us. It doesn't exist in our world. And so that is something, an example of something from their world that does not, and it will never translate into our world, even though it is, quote unquote, biblical. It's never going to happen. And they would consider somebody who basically bails out or reaches adolescence or whatever and decides, hey, I'm not doing this. That would be shameful, outrageous. It would be a community uproar if anybody did that. So on that whole issue of arranged marriages is an example of where value systems don't translate. And I'd like to give you another one. This story in the 1 Corinthians 5, which admittedly is difficult and I can't do it complete justice today, but that's about the man who's sleeping with his stepmother or whatever and putting him out of the community. Sin was understood as a social contaminant, not merely kind of like a defect in your own personal piety. That way of thinking didn't go away until about the 19th century also. So even some of the horrific burning of martyrs at the stake and everything, we look at that as just barbaric torture. But in their worldview, including Western worldview up to the 19th century, sin had a socially communal contaminating effect. That doesn't work in our world, Richard. Let me put it to you this way. Is there anybody listening to you and I today who's attending a megachurch with 5,000 people in it and who thinks for real that the porno habit of the guy sitting 300 yards away from me, whose face I don't even know, has any effect on my life and the effect on the community? Of course not. That's his personal problem. We're going to take him through discipleship class and help him. So the idea that, and I like to make a joke out of verses that Christians really don't believe. When one rejoices, we all rejoice. When one suffers, we all suffer. How does that guy's porno habit affect me at all on the other side of the sanctuary? It doesn't. And that's why we can carry on and hoot and holler and shout God's praises. In their world, that's a no-go. We are stopping the show. And that guy has got to go because his influence is viewed as a contaminant. We do not view sin as a social contaminant. We view it as an individual moral defect. Very, very different worldview. And we were chatting offline a bit, Richard. The fact of the matter is, both in terms of chronology and in terms of even this day's, the other, the 5.5 billion people who live in the non-West world, we are the minority, Richard. The post-Enlightenment European, not just white people, but people who have embraced that post-Enlightenment, we're the minority on this thing. Now, I'm not making a judgment who's right and who's wrong. I'm just saying, look, it's different. And we need to, when we read scriptures, we need to back down some of our dogmatism that makes us really look like fools if we don't do our due diligence and our do homework, things that we don't understand. So in that 1 Corinthians 5 thing, he shall be given over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. And we know that later on he's restored. See, the object isn't that he's punished for his peccadillos. The object is, can he be restored to the community? And that's why even issues like poverty, I cover this in my book on healing. I can't go too deep. Sin causes that individual's contribution to the community to be either negated or negative. So the fact that individual X is engaged in sin has community implications. And the fact that he is a contagion and has to be put out means the community suffers because the community misses the asset that human being brings, not just economic and financial, spiritual. And to me, Richard, when we understand these things, all of a sudden, all those body metaphors and stuff that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians, a totally different sphere of understanding opens up. Richard, let me ask you this question. Let's go to the megachurch analogy again. What Christian believes that if that guy 150 yards on the other side of the room is absent from the meeting for 4 weeks has any bearing on my life at all? Nobody. Because we're individualistic, subjective, and private, and my spirituality is private. That's why we don't believe. I don't even know if that guy's rejoicing or suffering. I don't know his name, let alone how does his sorrow affect me and affect this community? And then I'm not just trying to pick on the mega churches. It's just the easiest analogy to show you that we're not even in the same frame of reference of understanding basic things, Richard, when we don't have these conversations and we don't do our due diligence and we just open the book and we start reading it like it's a seventh grade chemistry book that everybody's just going to understand. That's simply not the case.
Wow. Can I pick up on one of the points which was very helpful that you made, which is that we miss out on so-and-so's X's, Y's spiritual contribution. I think you said that. So
yeah.
So they would see everything in terms of social contaminant. We don't. We're individualistic. So if the guy who's sleeping with his stepmom, or the guy who's known to have a massive drink problem, porno habit, whatever, and it's known, it doesn't have the same contaminant effect that it did for them, because we're all little moral islands.
Correct.
So what you're saying is that we should be thinking of what he not quite can contribute, but how much better the community would be if he was tracking better.
Yeah, absolute, Richard, you're getting it, but you're right, not in a legalistic, moralistic production sense, but in the body sense. Hey, I broke my little toe once. Could barely walk. And I'm thinking, it's just my little toe. The point is not, like there's a production unit that's missing, but that the reason the individual sins, the hamartema, are significant is because of the loss that human brings to the community. And honestly, Brother Richard, I don't know many churches that take this seriously, because as long as the preaching is good, as long as we got Sunday school for the kids, as long as we have dynamic praise and worship and an occasional Jesus chill up and down our spine, we're kicking it. And that we do sermons about the body, we do word studies about the body, but the dynamic of the reality of it simply doesn't exist. I believe it is one of the biggest challenges that the Western church faces because of cultural individualism. I would tell you what, our churches would be different, Richard, if I believe my relationship with you was a necessity. That there is an incarnate deposit of the resurrected life of Jesus Christ in you for me every time we're together, and vice versa, because it's a reciprocal kingdom. It's not a kingdom based on exchange. It's a kingdom of reciprocity and love. And when you're not there, Jesus is not there. Richard, I'm getting a little angry and a little amped. Richard, we just don't believe it. And that's why Michael is right. That's why Philip Lee is right. It's all Gnostic. Invisible God, invisible heaven, invisible hell, invisible rhetorical philosophy. And Richard, you are an add-on novelty. I can live with you or without you, because I got my Jesus in my heart, my Bible under my arm, and at the very best, you are a supplement. The idea that you might be a necessity is absurd. Now, I am what I would hope a reformed and healthier charismatic. What if the provision for my necessity is bound up in the person who is absent because of disease, sickness, poverty, sin, sorrow, depression? I suffer loss because of their absence, because their portion of Christ that they're carrying. Richard, I don't know 3 people who want to believe what I'm talking about right now. I've been at this a while. I have a few friends. We barely understand it, but I don't know one church that believes it, because we are thoroughly, the phrase is, atomistic individuals. We are, and that is the Western tradition. That's the Western philosophy. From the secular philosophists and on down, an atomistic individual. That's the ultimate reality. That's all there is. It's me and my atomistic individuality. There could not be a thought that is more anti-kingdom than that. And that is why individual sins, yes, they're serious, because they neutralize the greatness of Jesus that you contribute.
Wow. Yes. So you're saying that we need to remember all the time that the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts.
Always.
It's to do with the relationship. It's to do with what we do together, what we are together. Everybody has the Spirit of Jesus in them. That's a precious thing to be without if they're not well or they're absent. And you rightly laid some flack at the door of conservative churches where it's the preaching and this and the Bible under the arm, but surely some of the social more liberal churches are better on more of the right lines, would you say, in terms of looking after?
I would say their target, I would say their aim to target is better. I would say their implementation is equally defective, because I'm going to work a metaphor that you gave earlier. It's like having a dump truck full of bricks and dumping it on the problem. You haven't helped them.
Yeah. No cement.
Yeah, there's no cement. Cement, which the scriptures calls beautifully, in beautiful language, the bond of maturation, the bond of perfection, the cement of maturity. No. So to work the metaphor, I'm thinking that they probably have a better grasp of the social element, but then it gets contaminated with Marxist philosophy and politics. We're not talking about politics. We're talking about being human beings, which I suppose definitionally is inherently political. But the fact that I have a better dump truck of bricks doesn't mean that I am solving the problem any better than someone who doesn't have any bricks at all.
I've got it. Now you've mentioned a couple of things that like arranged marriages, the guy sleeping with his stepmom, where when we come to scripture, we need to realize the difference, that our society is so different. Our society is never going to be like their society. So we can't just try to make it. We just have to, well, really, as you say, see what Jesus is bringing to the picture. Now, let's go to one really difficult one, which would be money. Now, you mentioned offline when we were chatting that for somebody in their society to have more money than he needed was shameful, because money was a limited commodity, and it meant that, in their view, it meant that somebody was suffering with not enough. Somebody had too much, meant somebody had not enough. Now, we have a different worldview, which it's very different, may or may not be right. I don't think we can even judge that, but it does believe that together we can make a bigger cake, and provided we tax, people a bit, so that there's a certain amount of trickle down. What would be the Christian argument, as seen in the life and teaching of Jesus, that should teach us on this?
Man, that is a great question that we could do hours alone on. Let me take, I'm just going to swing for the fences here in a couple. First thing, it was somewhat prejudicially assumed that if you had excess, you either got it from oppressing the poor or through corruption. They were inherently suspicious, and you can't read the prophets without picking up a pretty good sniff of suspicion against the rich. That's because the aggregation of wealth was assumed to be achieved through unjust means. Whether or not that's accurate or not is not the question. That is the underlying abiding assumption. Now, in our world, that still exists, of course, but the assumption is that the accrual of giant amounts of wealth is the result of virtuous, effort and work and the Puritan work ethic and stuff. So where does the line come? How do I have to, give it all away and go live in a box? Listen, there's in the West, there's a company called Laterna, which is well known in North America for heavy industrial equipment. The gentleman was a devout believer, and just personally, he decided to live on 10% and give away 90, and he did just fine. But not everybody's going to do that. And for me, the only rational way I can come to wrestle with this is awareness without obligation and duty. I have to, and we joke about it. We've been talking about it, Simone Weil. We joke about it. Pay attention. I could give my body to be burned. I could give all the way on my riches. If I have not love, it doesn't matter. Does that mean that my prosperity, I don't have the right to enjoy my prosperity? No. So then where is the line? And this is going to sound like an incredibly cliche, charismatic answer, and I don't mean it that way, but there is no shortcut to being a spirit-led son or daughter of God who walks through this life aware and in tune and understands this. Today's yes can be tomorrow's no. For instance, I'll give you an example. Father, I have $5,000. We want to go on vacation. Well, how can you even think of go on vacation when you know there are starving children and homeless people in your community? That $5,000 should go to, the food and home shelter. You terrible Christian. That would be the leftist sort of argument, right? The rightist sort of argument would be, well, those people are homeless and food is because they're indolent and they lack discipline, and they're getting what they're deserved. And both of those are wrong. God could say yes today and no tomorrow on the same question. It's called being led by the Spirit. Well, I've got $200 extra. Can I go? I want to buy an upgrade to my motorcycle. No, you need to give that to the food shelter in your community. If my Father tells me to. If I'm really open, and I know this is open to abuse and self-delusion, because everybody's going to justify their carnality. Everybody does it. That's why being a follower of Jesus isn't easy. And that's why being a true son and daughter of God isn't easy. So for that same $5,000 question, one year he could say, go ahead and take a vacation. And next year you have another $5,000. The problem is normalizing the exceptional. We can't do that. Just because God says yes on Tuesday doesn't mean he's going to say yes on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. That's why I do believe in a God that speaks. I do believe that the sheep hear his voice for exactly these kind of reasons. And I do believe that's why there's no codified answer to the question. Because it could be okay on Tuesday and totally not okay on Wednesday. And it's a very dissatisfactory response for people who are looking for those rule book type, answers and questions. well, what is God's standard? God's standard is love. God's standard is responding to what his spirit is prompting you to do and being aware. Pay attention. Sometimes Christians ask me about the Christian life, and my charismatic Christian friends want to get all mystical with me and techniquey with me regarding gifts of the Spirit and how do you do this and how do you do that. And my one-liner is pay attention and let love rule your heart. Pay attention and let love rule your heart. It simplifies a lot of stuff, Richard.
Without making love into a formula. Yeah.
Correct.
In a sense, you've taken us in these 6 talks around an enormous field of
Yes, sir.
Flowers and weeds and misunderstandings, and we've arrived at a gate inside the field, and the other side of the gate is an even bigger field.
Yes, sir.
One might call, what is it to be led by the Spirit?
Yes,
and
sir.
That may be your next task.
Well, maybe, but could I tell you something? And I'll get emotional too, but all of a sudden some promises in the scripture just open up in dimensions that we don't understand. There are reasons why joy, Paul calls it joy unspeakable. When we get on the other side of the gate and we get past these right and wrong and what can I do and what can't I do, and literally burst into the new creation, the vistas of the new creation are beyond description, Richard. And it's heartbreaking that so many are, some I even know are giving up on the faith because they're so disillusioned. So that gate that you mentioned is for real, but it really is a Wizard of Oz sort of thing, where they passes from Kansas to the Wizard of Oz. It's like, what is this? This isn't anything at all what I thought it was about. This is liberating. This is full of life. This is freeing. This is empowering. This has got nothing. This is nothing like what I've experienced in Christianity. My one-liner, it's like being born again. That's just the best way I can describe it. It's like I had never known what I didn't know. And then when this happens, vistas, just boundless vistas of diverse opportunity explode open before you.
Well, I think that's a brilliant, a brilliant last word on these 6 sessions to leave with people. Can
I put my little offer here?
Yes,
at the
do.
Folks, for those of you that might want to dig deeper on this, I do this in 6 hours. I have a 6-hour video series on the page, complete with notes. For those that have made it through this far, beginning in mid-June, I'm going to make that series available for any donation amount. Normally, I ask $75 for it because I think literally hours and hours and hours and hours of my time is worth something. But if you've made it this far through that series and you have hunger to want to go deeper into some of these cultural things, that's going to, about mid-June, that's going to be available for as little as $1. So check it out in mid-June if you are interested.
Dr. Stephen Crosby, thank you very much for taking us through honor, shame, and sin.
It's been a delight, Richard. It's always good to be with you. It's always good to talk to you.
Thank you.